Today, we're here to talk about breastfeeding, specifically about pumping breast milk and going back to work.
Hello, and welcome to Sounds Healthy, a podcast of University Health System. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allen.
Hi, welcome back to Sounds Healthy. Today we're here with certified lactation specialist Kate McLachlan, University Health System, and we're going to be talking about navigating the workplace and pumping your breast milk for baby, who's waiting eagerly at home for you. Welcome back to Sounds Healthy, Kate. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So pumping and going back to work, that's a whole world, isn't it?
It is.
Do you talk to a lot of mothers about what to anticipate? Do you talk to them about the problems they run into? They call you once they've gone back? Tell me about that experience.
We do. Our outpatient lactation consultant in particular sees moms after discharge and for weeks and months beyond, which is when a lot of these questions come up, when moms go back to work and suddenly discover all of the complications. So it's good to do some planning in advance and sort of anticipatory guidance about what types of things moms can do to prepare to go back to work and be pumping.
So women do have legal protections if they want to pump while they're working, yes?
They do. There's a federal law for employers of a certain size. So as long as the employer has over 50 employees, they are federally mandated to provide reasonable break times for pumping and reasonable accommodations in terms of location of pumping.
And I noticed that Texas also passed a law requiring public employers, which had been a loophole, to also provide these accommodations.
Right. So states can, of course, always go further and be more generous than the federal government. And then the state law would then apply. And, of course, employers, it's a good mark for them to be able to provide these accommodations for their employees. Certainly more and more women in the workforce are looking for this. And so a lot of employers, even if they don't meet that standard of 50 employees, still do provide these kinds of accommodations for their workforce. Because another, side benefit is that working women who breastfeed miss fewer days of work because their children are sick less often.
Ah, yes. So if a woman wants to see if a potential employer provides these accommodations, she can see if they have a certain designation, correct?
Right. There's I believe it's called the Mother-Friendly Workplace designation for employers who are breastfeeding friendly and do make these kinds of accommodations for their employees. And it certainly is something that a lot of women look for when they're looking for an employer.
Oh, good on them. And so what are some of the considerations besides just having a place to do it and having your boss be okay with it that you run into?
Right. So another thing that we hear from a lot of moms is concern about childcare accommodations. So there's a lot of considerations to look at when you're planning to go back to work. So what we recommend is to let your employer know, far enough ahead of time what your plan is. If any adjustments need to be made to your schedule, and then locating a childcare provider. If you're using an out-of-home childcare provider, some women want to find a location that's close by, if they might be able to take breaks when they're at work and actually be able to go and breastfeed directly during their workday. But if that's not possible, also finding a childcare situation where they are willing to provide maternal milk and have adequate storage and know how to handle breast milk and feed the breast milk to the babies. So what your childcare situation is, of course, is important. Location and timing, and finding out if you are able to take breaks to directly breastfeed. Now, that's a luxury that a lot of people can't afford. And so then they need to really determine, it's woman to woman, individual to individual. There are differences in how long it takes some women to pump their milk, what kinds of environments they need to be in. So Ideally, there's a designated space. In fact, in the law, it stipulates that it cannot be a restroom, that it needs to be a space with privacy where the woman can have the door locked so that nobody walks in on her. And then, there are employers who really go that extra mile to make sure that it's a space where the lights can be dimmed and where it is not an expectation that the employee will be doing work while they're pumping, because that is sometimes, there might happen to be a computer and a desk in that room where the mom can continue working. But some people really need low lights and focus and maybe music and relaxation in order to do that, whereas some people are able to multitask and continue working while they pump.
Attend meetings, give orders, make decisions, multitask.
Yes, it's becoming more and more of a reality as the equipment sort of catches up with that.
A blessing and a curse.
That's right.
I was once in the courthouse and I walked into the restroom and I heard a very familiar sound. And I just said, "Oh, I know that sound." And then I said, "Do you want me to help you find a place?" And the voice of a woman from inside the stall said, "No, I can pretty much do this anywhere. Just give me a hook and I'm good." So, we're pretty resourceful.
Absolutely. Flexibility can definitely be an advantage, people who can do that. And speaking of that, in terms of just equipment, some employers actually provide double electric hospital grade pumps in the pumping rooms for their employees so that the employee doesn't need to slog their pump back and forth to work. And some employers even give a kit to every mom so that she has her parts. Some people purchase an additional pump to keep at work to not have to schlep back and forth. So that's one consideration. Actually, really even down to clothing, making sure that the clothing that you wear gives you easy access, hands-free pumping bras. There's just so many things to consider in terms of your, equipment and wardrobe and what you need to have available to you to pump at work.
That's a little overwhelming.
Right.
So never mind a birth plan, you need a pumping plan.
No kidding. It shouldn't have to be this complicated, and it isn't always, but it's always better to foresee all of the potential things that you need to think about ahead of time. So that planning is important, and the communication with your employer. And potentially some people even say, they make sure that they let all of their coworkers know that this is going to be happening so that they're comfortable. Some women say that they find a pumping buddy at work, someone who's also pumping, that they can kind of, sort of support each other through this, because it can be a little overwhelming.
Sure, or even somebody who has been through it who can just be an advocate for you.
Right. So another worry that we hear from a lot of moms that we talk to them about, parents in the hospital, are concerns that they want to immediately give their baby a bottle in the first few days because they are concerned that they want their baby to learn how to feed from the bottle.
Oh, yeah.
Because that causes a lot of anxiety about, if I'm breastfeeding my baby initially, how is my baby going to transition from the breast to the bottle?
Isn't that like the opposite of nipple confusion?
Right. Nipple confusion in reverse. So, and there are some babies that, really like to breastfeed, and that's what they've learned. And they've had moms who have, diligently, exclusively breastfed. Initially, that's a lot of work. And then it becomes really easy for most women to have it be convenient and always at the right temperature. And you don't need to deal with any kind of equipment. And it really is the best way to get the breast milk supply started and to maintain a good milk supply is to keep putting baby to the breast. So we try to help those moms not feel so anxious about the baby really doesn't need to learn to use the bottle in the first few days or even really the first few weeks. What's most important is to avoid that nipple confusion because that's what's going to really protect the milk supply, having baby directly at the breast. But it is a concern. There are some babies that really don't like the transition to the bottle. And there's a whole industry that has developed around this of, bottles that are shaped like the breast, bottles that have different shaped nipples. And what we usually tell moms is a lot of that is kind of marketing, but that to really just test out a bunch of different types of bottles with baby, that we don't really know which one the baby is going to take to until they're doing it. So we do encourage moms to try a lot of different bottles, and we really encourage moms not to be the ones who are bottle feeding the baby, because they're typically, if they're continuing to work and pump, they're going to be coming home and breastfeeding the baby at home. And so a lot of babies are very smart and they don't want to take the bottle directly from the source when they could be breastfeeding. And so a lot of people want to have someone else, and it's often important for the mom to even leave the room while baby is feeding from the bottle.
You're here. Give me the good stuff.
Exactly. So having, potentially if it's a family member who's going to be looking after baby while you're at work, maybe have that person start to feed with the bottle so that the baby gets used to that. Gosh, I had a friend who went back to work, and her husband was staying home with the baby, and it was just very fraught because the baby would not take the bottle for the first few days at all. And he was panicking and calling constantly. And what he finally figured out was that if he got into the bathtub and went skin to skin with the baby, that he could feed the baby the bottle in the bathtub, skin to skin. So that became his routine.
Good old skin to skin.
Yes, people go great lengths. And another thing that people don't realize is that babies can actually cup feed pretty well, pretty early. And so for some people, they find that the babies that won't take the bottle, they will take a cup and they can actually feed them milk that way. And so that's always another thing to try. I also am on a listserv of Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine professionals, and somebody mentioned milksicles, that some babies will take a breast milk popsicle.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So
temperature is not the issue.
Not for some.
I had a question that I wanted to ask, and that is about what we were talking about nipple confusion. And pacifiers came to mind. So when my baby was born, we had done the reading, and we were concerned about nipple confusion. So we waited 2 weeks before we gave him a pacifier. And that first time we popped that pacifier in there, life got so much better for everyone.
And he didn't have trouble going back to the breast?
Not at all.
Yeah. So the research, I'll give you sort of the research answer, is that the research is kind of out on nipple confusion and pacifiers. It's mixed. The gold standard for someone trying to establish breastfeeding is to do what you did, which is to wait on the pacifier, because we don't really know what the effect is going to be in terms of baby. It's just a different, baby sucks on a pacifier differently from how they do on the breast. It's a different shape. It's a different consistency, but it's different from feeding milk through a nipple, because when they're sucking on the pacifier, they're not getting nourishment from it. And so I think that that's really why the nipple confusion is less, the connection with nipple confusion is less clear. However, we caution parents when they want pacifiers. We do provide them along with the education. And the education is our biggest concern, is that a parent who's going to immediately put the pacifier in baby's mouth as soon as they start squirming, as soon as they start crying, is perhaps missing hunger cues. And one of the things that breastfeeding parents are first learning in the early days is baby's hunger cues and baby's patterns. And so we encourage skin to skin and learning how to soothe and comfort the baby in other ways, and not to mask the baby's early hunger cues with the pacifier, because it is so tempting to just keep putting it in the baby's mouth. And that's sort of masking all of those early hunger cues, which are all sort of licking and mouth sort of movements. And then you take the pacifier out and the baby is hungry and mad, and then it's hard to get a hungry and mad baby on the breast. So pacifiers, we just use judiciously with caution and with education.
And then nipple confusion is more of an issue with the bottle?
Right.
Okay, so that's why you wait. How long would you wait before trying the bottle, if you can, in an ideal situation?
Yes, so gold standard, what we like to say is wait at least 4 to 6 weeks before introducing milk through a bottle top nipple to baby. Because again, that 4 to 6 weeks is when you're really establishing your milk supply, establishing breastfeeding patterns. Baby is getting good at it, and you have a strong milk supply. That's when it's okay to start introducing the bottle.
And if mom has to go back to work before then, so be it.
Absolutely. Then we just say, if it's possible to just wait. We still caution very early nipple introduction. So supplementing with a bottle top nipple for the first few days in the hospital can be really tricky, because that's really when baby is learning. And People also tend to, when baby then takes milk through a bottle, they tend to overfeed as well, because it's the baby's automatic sucking reflex when a bottle goes into the mouth. When a firm nipple hits the palate of the mouth, the baby just sucks. And if a parent is not taught how to do that feeding carefully and in a paced way, if they're tipping the baby backwards, and I mean not backwards, but they're cradling them in their arms in a reclined position, and then that nipple goes into baby's mouth, they will suck because that's their reflex. And that baby now is not really in control of that feed. So even the nipples that are made to be slow flow nipples, or nipples that are supposed to be like the breast, usually they're still much faster than the breast milk coming out. When baby's at the breast, baby completely controls the pace of that feed. And when you're feeding them in a reclined position with a bottle top nipple, the baby will suck, and before you know it, they've taken, an ounce or two in the first day of life, which is way more than they need. They really only need, the biologic norm at the breast is that they take about 2 to 5 milliliters per feed at the breast.
God,
an ounce is 30 milliliters, right?
Oh my gosh, that seems like nothing.
It's really, really minimal.
So, and when baby is in the NICU, or mom can't be with baby and there has to be bottle feeding, but mom still hopes to breastfeed some, how do you manage that back and forth when it has to start right away?
Right. So we have an initiative here at the hospital where we are trying to make sure that once baby can take oral feeds, not through a tube or through IVs, that can be at the breast, and that's sort of ideal for baby to start taking those feeds at the breast. But it's true that a lot of babies in our NICU aren't able to, and nor are the parents able to be there. Mom's not able to be there to do breastfeedings at every feed. So there is a lot more bottle feeding in the NICU for medical justifiable reasons. And in those cases, we really just work with those moms and have lactation support available for them if needed at the feed to really sort of show them and help them with positioning and help them. Sometimes there's even a tool that can be used called a nipple shield, which is a really thin silicone plastic shield that goes over the nipple and kind of makes the human nipple into more of a shape and feel of a bottle top nipple. The baby can latch more easily to those usually, especially if they're preterm babies or especially if they're used to a lot of bottle feeds. And then that way, at least you're still getting that advantage of the suckling at the breast and the baby getting, especially for a mom who's already brought her full milk supply in, the baby can get a full feed even with a nipple shield on. And then we just encourage those moms to gradually kind of wean the baby off of the nipple shield and onto the nipple directly.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's an interesting little tool.
Lots of tools.
And in going back to work and pumping at work, we've talked about the place to do it. And what we were going to get into next was the storage issue. Like, you have to have a place to store this milk. I'm sure mothers are like, I need an absolutely, completely sanitary place to store this milk, and all I've got is the filthy refrigerator and bag.
So what a lot of people do, filthy refrigerator is not ideal, but again, we also don't need to go overboard. You don't need a sterile refrigerator to put your breast milk in. The same refrigerator that all the other employees feel comfortable putting their food in is really okay for breast milk as well. Of course, what most people choose to do is to bring like a little cooler bag and then put the milk in that and then put it in the refrigerator in the cooler bag. If a refrigerator isn't available, a cooler bag with the blue ice or, a way to keep it cold, in an appropriately cooled and insulated bag, the breast milk is good for 24 hours. So you can, even if you don't have access to a refrigerator, keep your breast milk cold in an insulated bag with the blue ice or whatever it is that you're using until you can get it home and either get it in the refrigerator or the freezer.
So you don't have to obsessively monitor the temperature with a thermometer. And, oh my God, it's gone up above, 45
Right.
degrees. I'm going to have to throw it out. It's
Right.
bad.
As long as you know your insulated bag and you know that you have appropriate cooling. You don't need to measure temperatures. And the general rule of thumb is to keep in a cooler bag, it's good for 24 hours. The most conservative end in the fridge is 3 days, and then in the freezer is 3 months. But most of the time, if kept under good conditions and you have a freezer where you're consistently putting the milk in the back of the freezer and not close to the door or in the door, that it's adequate up to 6 months.
So just keep rotating that stock.
That's right. Put your newest milk. You write the date on it. You put it at the back of the freezer. A lot of people use the bags instead of bottles because you can store a lot more of them. Lay them flat, freeze them so they're like a board, and then stick them in the back. Yep.
Oh yeah, and then you open it up, and it's like a little library back there.
Right. And so thawing is really important too, because we get a lot of moms who ask us about how to thaw the breast milk. The research is that freezing and thawing appropriately really doesn't degrade the most important components of the milk. And so it still stays, very valuable in terms of all of its components and micronutrients and everything, as long as it's thawed appropriately. So we say, you never boil it on the stove, for instance. Even in the bag, you don't want to put it in boiling water, and you don't ever want to thaw in the microwave because that can degrade the milk. And of course, the microwave has the added problem of creating hot spots sometimes. So what we usually recommend is the safest way is to thaw slowly in the fridge. So if you bring your milk from the freezer to the fridge and you're in your routine where baby's going to eat it out of the fridge sooner, or just putting it in a bowl or a cup of hot water from the tap in the bag, it will thaw out within about 10 minutes.
And what temperature should you try to get it to feed baby? I mean, do you have to warm it to body temperature, or room temperature is fine?
Babies are all different in that the general rule is that most babies don't like to drink very cold milk. But there's no specific temperature, but we usually just say, enough to thaw and kind of bring it to a comfortable room temperature, like the old tried and true method of testing it on the inside of the wrist where your skin is sensitive to make sure that it's not too hot and that it's not too cold.
Are there any other considerations that, with regard to pumping and going back to work, we talked about storage. We've talked about finding the right place. We've talked about transportation. We've talked about nipple confusion.
One other topic that we get a lot of questions about and that we always want to make sure moms are educated about before they go home or before they go back to work and really start using a pump frequently is the issue of discomfort, physical discomfort with the pump. Sometimes we notice that some of these moms are fearful that it's going to hurt or be uncomfortable. And our response is always that your pump should never cause pain or damage to the nipples. And the two most important factors there are the actual part of the pump that's called the shield, which is the part that goes against the breast. There's a shield, like a funnel section, and then there's a tube or a tunnel that connects to the pump. And so being fitted correctly for that shield size, most of the pumps come with several different size options. The pump pieces usually break down into several different pieces that have to be cleaned in a specific way. So we want to make sure that moms know how to determine whether they're using the right size shield, which is that the areola should be snug at the bend of the shield, but the nipple should be free-flowing in the tunnel. So, meaning when they turn it on and the suction starts, it shouldn't pull too much of the nipple into the channel, or else that can cause chafing and discomfort. But it also shouldn't have the nipple get all jammed up in the tunnel, because then you're actually not going to remove the milk as effectively. So there's a bit of an art to making sure that someone checks your shield fit. And then the suction strength of the pump is really important too. Most of the electric pumps have an adjustment on it for suction strength. And you can, what we usually recommend and what the pump manufacturers recommend is that you turn it up until it is a little bit uncomfortable and then back it down. So that way you're at the highest comfortable suction strength. So moms who are overzealous and who are starting to pump immediately and going for 45 minutes and cranking it up to the max, we always tell them, it's not worth it. It's not worth the potential pain and damage to the nipples. It's not really going to get that much more milk out, but that the best way to do it is to make sure that you're never feeling discomfort. And if you are, to ask for help with it. So keep your suction strength reasonable and make sure that your shield fits well.
Rules for living.
Yes.
Make sure everything's that comfortable.
That's right.
Well, thank you for talking with us today, Kate. I really appreciate it. I think we've got a lot of good information there about navigating all the things about going back to work.
I know. Who knew? So complicated, yet so valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Sounds Healthy, a production of University Health System in San Antonio, Texas, produced and directed by me, Elizabeth Allen. Editing and audio production by Mark Greenberg. Web and digital support by Selena Mejia and Joe Campa. Executive producer Lenny Kirkman. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel.